A 9-year-old boy watched his father get poisoned by rival tribes. They abandoned him on the frozen steppe to die. But this wasn't the end of Temujin's story. It was the beginning of the most brutal revenge in human history. 20 years later, he ruled an empire stretching from China to Europe. Our story kicks off around the year 1162, with the birth of a boy named Temujin. He was born into the Borjigan clan, the son of a minor Mongol chieftain, Yesugei. Legend says he came into the world clutching a blood clot in his fist, a detail that a soothsayer would have called a sign of a great warrior's destiny. But for young Temujin, destiny felt more like a cruel joke. The Mongolian steppe wasn't one country, but a violent mosaic of rival tribes, the Tatars, the Merkits, the Naimans, and more, all stuck in a constant loop of raids, kidnappings, and revenge. Loyalty was flimsy, and power was measured in horses, warriors, and strong alliances. Temujin got his first taste of this brutal reality when he was only 9. His father, Yesugei, was poisoned by rival Tatars, a bitter and sudden end for a clan leader. When a chieftain died, his clan often scattered, and that's exactly what happened to Yesugei's family. Their own people, seeing no use for a widow and her young kids, abandoned them. Cast out and alone, they were left to fend for themselves on the steppe, which was pretty much a slow-motion execution. This period of exile was the fire that forged the man Temujin would become. Led by his fiercely resilient mother, Hoelun, the family survived by scrounging for wild fruits and hunting whatever small game they could find. It was a life of desperate poverty and constant fear. The pressure even broke the family apart. In a grim fight over a fish, a young Temujin killed his own half-brother. It was a shocking act, but it cemented his role as the head of this starving, desperate family. It was a harsh lesson in the ruthlessness needed to survive in his world, let alone lead. As a young man, Temujin started showing the charisma that would one day draw thousands to his banner. He was pragmatic, tough, and had a natural feel for the tangled web of tribal politics. His first real step out of the shadows came from an alliance with 2 major steppe leaders, Togrul, Khan of the powerful Rewrote tribe, and a sworn blood brother to his late father, and a charming young warrior named Jamuka. That alliance was tested almost immediately. In a devastating raid, Temujin's new wife, Borta, was kidnapped by the rival Merkit tribe. Stealing women was a common tactic in steppe warfare, a way to humiliate and dominate your enemies. For Temujin, this wasn't just politics. It was personal, a challenge he had to answer. He called on his allies for help. Togrul and Jamuka both brought their armies, and together they smashed the Merkits and rescued Borta. This victory wasn't just a personal win. It announced Temujin's arrival. He had shown he could build alliances, command respect, and win on the battlefield. The outcast was no longer just a survivor, he was a contender. Rescuing Borta was the turning point. It gave Temujin a reputation as a skilled leader, and warriors started flocking to his camp, drawn by his charisma and the smell of victory. His friendship with his blood brother Jamuka was especially vital. They had sworn oaths of eternal loyalty, and for a while they were an unstoppable team. But the steppe wasn't big enough for 2 leaders. As the Mongol proverb says, the sky cannot have 2 suns. The deep-seated differences between the 2 men began to surface. Jamuka was an aristocrat to the core. He believed in the old ways, where power was inherited and your bloodline was everything. Temujin was the opposite. He was a revolutionary. His life as an outcast taught him that loyalty and skill meant more than noble birth. He started promoting his commanders based on merit and how they performed in battle, not on who their father was. This wasn't just new, it was a direct threat to the power of the tribal aristocracy that backed Jamuka. This clash of ideas was destined to become a clash of armies. As Temujin's star rose, Jamuka started to see him not as a brother, but as a rival. The alliance shattered, and the two friends became bitter enemies, splitting the Mongol world between them. In their first major battle around 1187, Temujin was soundly defeated. He was forced into a retreat and may have even spent years as a subject of the Jin dynasty in northern China, a mysterious period of his life that historians still debate. But Temujin was, if nothing else, resilient. He re-emerged in 1196, not broken, but more determined than ever. He rebuilt his power, doubling down on his policy of meritocracy, which attracted a fiercely loyal following. Under Temujin, soldiers knew their bravery would be rewarded, and they could rise through the ranks no matter where they came from. He also rolled out a brilliant organizational reform, structuring his army on a decimal system. Warriors were put into units of 10 Arban, 100 Jagan, 1,000 Mingan, and 10,000 Tumen. This simple system shattered old tribal allegiances, mixing warriors from different clans into a single disciplined force, loyal only to Temujin. The rivalry with Jamuka reached its peak. In 1201, a council of tribes who hated Temujin elected Jamuka as their Gur Khan, or universal ruler, a direct challenge for control of the steppe. The final act was coming. Temujin first dealt with his other major rival, his former ally Togrul of the Karets. Togrul, sensing Temujin's rising power, launched a surprise attack in 1203, but Temujin's disciplined forces regrouped and completely crushed the Karets. With Togrul gone, only Jamuka and his coalition were left. The final showdown came with the defeat of the Naiman tribe, Jamuka's last powerful supporters. In the end, Jamuka was betrayed by his own men and handed over to Temujin. The accounts of their last meeting are heavy with tragedy. Temujin reportedly offered to forgive his old friend and renew their brotherhood. But Jamuka refused, saying there was only room for one sun in the sky. He asked for a noble's death, one without shedding blood, as was tradition for royalty. Temujin granted his request and had his back broken. With Jamuka dead and every rival tribe defeated, Temujin was the undisputed master of the Mongolian steppe. He had done the impossible. Through decades of brutal struggle, political genius, and a revolutionary vision for leadership, he had taken a fractured, warring people and forged them into a single nation. The year is 1206. On the banks of the Onon River, a great assembly, a Kurultai, is called. All the chieftains of the now united Mongol tribes gathered for a historic council. It was here they officially recognized the man who had brought them all together. Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, a title that likely means universal ruler. This wasn't just a coronation, it was the birth of the Mongol Empire. Genghis Khan didn't waste a second. His first moves as supreme leader weren't military, but administrative. He knew that force alone couldn't hold a nation together. It needed laws, structure, and a shared identity. One of his greatest legacies was a legal code known as the Yasa. No complete version survives, but we know it was a set of laws covering everything from military discipline to social etiquette. The Yasa was designed to enforce obedience to the Khan, bind the nomads together, and punish crime without mercy. The laws were harsh, but they worked. The Yasa outlawed kidnapping women, made horse theft a capital crime, and demanded absolute loyalty in the army. Looting the enemy was forbidden until a general gave permission, which meant disciplined invasions and an orderly division of spoils. It also established religious freedom, a shockingly progressive policy for the time. By creating a single set of laws, Genghis Khan erased old tribal beefs and created a new, collective Mongol identity. He also established practical innovations that became the empire's backbone. He ordered the adoption of a script, allowing for written laws and records. He created the Yam, a highly efficient postal relay system, like an imperial internet of its day. This network of stations with fresh horses and riders allowed messages and intelligence to fly across his vast territory, with incredible speed, which was critical for governing and coordinating armies. With Mongolia unified, Genghis Khan turned his eyes outward. The Mongols had long depended on trade with the settled civilizations on their borders, but those relationships were often tense. States like the Jin dynasty and Western Xia would impose heavy taxes or cut off trade entirely. The first campaigns of the new Mongol Empire were driven by this economic need. The first target was the Tangut Kingdom of Western Xia in 1209. Genghis Khan correctly guessed that their powerful neighbors, the Jin dynasty, wouldn't lift a finger to help them. The Mongol army, sharpened by decades of steppe warfare, was a terrifyingly efficient machine. Their strength was mobility. Expert horsemen who could fire composite bows with deadly accuracy at a full gallop. They were masters of psychological warfare, often using feigned retreats to lure enemies into traps. After a relentless campaign, the Western Xia ruler surrendered and became a vassal of the Mongol Empire. With the West secured, Genghis Khan turned to a much bigger prize, the powerful Jin dynasty of northern China. For years, the Jin had treated the Mongols like dirt. Now the tables had turned. The Mongols swept across the North China plain, but fortified cities were a new kind of challenge for their cavalry army. This is where Genghis Khan showed one of his greatest strengths: adaptability. He absorbed conquered peoples, especially Chinese engineers, into his army. They taught the Mongols how to build and use siege engines like catapults and battering rams, turning them from a nomadic horde into an army that could bring down the strongest walls. By 1215, the Mongols had captured the Jin capital of Zhongdu, modern-day Beijing. The Jin emperor was forced to flee south to Kaifeng, abandoning his capital. While Jin resistance would continue for years, the entire northern half of their kingdom was now vulnerable to the Mongols. The outcast boy from the steppe was now an emperor, his name a source of terror across the known world. But his most devastating campaign was still to come. While the war with the Jin dynasty dragged on, a new and much more dramatic conflict was brewing to the west. The Mongol Empire now shared a border with the Khwarazmian Empire, a massive and wealthy sultanate stretching across Persia and Central Asia. At first, Genghis Khan didn't want to invade. He wanted to trade. He sent a message to the Khwarazmian ruler, Shah Muhammad II, greeting him as an equal and proposing a treaty of friendship and commerce. The Shah agreed, but the peace was short-lived. The breaking point came in 1218 at the Khwarazmian border city of Otrar. A Mongol trade caravan, which likely included diplomats, arrived in the city. The governor, a relative of the Shah, got suspicious and accused them of being spies. Without checking with the Shah, he had the entire caravan, hundreds of merchants, arrested and executed, and he seized their goods. When news of the massacre reached Genghis Khan, he was furious. Still, he gave diplomacy one more chance. He sent 3 envoys directly to the Shah to demand the governor be handed over for punishment. The Shah's response was an act of pure arrogance. He had the Mongol envoys' beards shaved off to humiliate them, and had the lead ambassador, a Muslim, beheaded. He sent the other 2 back to their Khan. This was the ultimate insult. In Mongol culture, ambassadors were sacred. Murdering his envoys was a declaration of war Genghis couldn't ignore. This was no longer about trade. It was about revenge. The Shah had just signed his own empire's death warrant. Genghis spent the next year meticulously planning his invasion. He gathered a massive army, estimated at up to 200,000 soldiers. In 1219, the storm broke. Shah Muhammad II, despite having more men, made a catastrophic mistake. Instead of gathering his forces for one decisive battle, he spread them out to defend his major cities. He played right into Genghis Khan's hands. The Mongol invasion was a masterclass in speed and strategy. Genghis split his army into multiple columns that punched deep into the empire. While one force besieged Otrar, Genghis himself led the main army on one of the most daring marches in military history. He guided his forces across the vast, arid, and supposedly impassable Kizilkum Desert. appearing out of nowhere deep in the Khwarazmian heartland. The great city of Bukhara was caught completely off guard. It surrendered on February 10, 1220. The few soldiers who held out in the citadel were slaughtered. Genghis Khan rode his horse into the city's main mosque and, according to the historian Juvayni, told the terrified crowd, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." The Mongols looted the city, enslaved many, and conscripted its artisans before burning much of it to the ground. From Bukhara, they moved to the capital, the legendary city of Samarkand. It was better defended, but its fate was sealed. The Mongols used prisoners from Bukhara as human shields in their assault. After a short bloody siege, the city surrendered. The soldiers who resisted were executed, the city was plundered, and its skilled workers were sent back to Mongolia. The campaign was shockingly brutal. Cities that resisted were wiped from the face of the earth, their people massacred without mercy. This wasn't random violence. It was calculated, psychological warfare. The horror stories from cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, and later Urgench and Merv spread like wildfire, terrifying other cities into surrendering without a fight. Meanwhile, Shah Muhammad II was hunted relentlessly by the Mongol generals Jebe and Subutai. He fled across his own crumbling empire and died a penniless fugitive on an island in the Caspian Sea. In less than 2 years, the mighty Khwarazmian Empire had been completely erased. The Mongol wave had crashed over Central Asia, leaving a trail of smoking ruins and reshaping the world forever. The conquests of Genghis Khan were undeniably savage, leaving a legacy of destruction with a death toll in the millions. And yet, paradoxically, this period of extreme violence created an era of unprecedented peace and stability, known as the Pax Mongolica, or the Mongol Peace. By conquering a single vast territory from the Pacific to the edge of Europe, Genghis Khan created the largest contiguous land empire in history. And within its borders, a new world began to form. The biggest consequence was the rebirth of the Silk Road. For centuries, this network of trade routes had been fragmented and dangerous. Under the unified Mongol administration, it flourished like never before. The Mongols policed the routes, making them safe for travel. It was said that a young woman could walk from one end of the empire to the other with a gold nugget on her head and never be harassed. This new security sparked an explosion of commerce and communication. Goods, technology, and ideas flowed freely between China, Persia, and Europe. Gunpowder, the compass, and printing moved west, while Western science and medicine traveled east. The Yam postal system now stretched across the continent, helping merchants and travelers like Marco Polo move just as easily as official messages. The Mongol Empire, born from war, had become a global conduit for cultural and economic exchange. Genghis Khan's leadership drove this transformation. He was a pragmatist. He continued to promote leaders based on skill, not birthright, creating an incredibly effective administration drawn from across his diverse empire. He adopted the innovations of the peoples he conquered, from siege weapons to government systems. He also practiced religious tolerance, a policy that helped keep the peace in his multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire. But the great Khan wasn't finished. After conquering Khwarazmia, he returned east to deal with a betrayal. The Tangut kingdom of Western Shia, which had sworn loyalty to him back in 1209, had refused to send troops for the Khwarazmian campaign. To Genghis Khan, this was rebellion, and it had to be punished. In 1226, he launched his final campaign, determined to make an example of the Tanguts. The war against Western Xia was as brutal as any that had come before. But during this campaign, in 1227, the invincible conqueror finally met his own end. The exact cause of his death is still a mystery. Some sources say he died from injuries after falling from his horse. Others suggest illness, maybe typhus, or that he was killed in battle. He was around 65 years old. Even in death, his will was absolute. His final command was for the Western Xia to be utterly destroyed, their defiance erased from history. His successors carried out his order to the letter. After his death, his body was returned to Mongolia to be buried in a secret, unmarked grave. To this day, the location of his tomb remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. Genghis Khan transformed from an abandoned child to the ruler of the largest empire in history. But his story is just one of countless forgotten legends that shaped our world. If you want to uncover more untold stories from history's most pivotal moments, hit subscribe and the notification bell. Which historical figure should we explore next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. Alexander the Great, Cleopatra, or maybe someone completely unexpected. Your choice could be our next episode.